Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Meiser Sheni. Today's share begins with Perek Aleph, ending Halacha Gimel, and God willing, starting the second chapter in this Masechta Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Yud Aleph, and we left off on Daf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amud by the dot of a Rav Krispa. Let's quickly review. In the Mishnah, we learned that if a person had food purchased with Meiser Sheni funds, and being that when there isn't no Beis HaMikdash yet, or when there's no Mizbeach yet, I'm not certain if it's the Beis HaMikdash or the Mizbeach, that food may not be eaten. So the Mishnah says all of that food has to be left to rot, with the Chiddush as we explained. Now, that is what we had in the Mishnah. We began the sugya on Daf Yud Amud Beis all the way in the bottom, that there is a brayse that quotes a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and let me review how we learned Pshat, how the Gemara understood Pshat in this machlokes. That let's quickly, before the machlokes, understand that there are a couple of steps over here. You have the original produce of Meiser Sheni, that the Torah gives a lachatchila dika option for its owner to be paid it on money. That step was done. The way we learned the Mishnah, that's not the way we learned the Braisa, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. They're not talking about that step. But now that you have the money, and now you're going to be mechalal, you're going to deconsecrate the ma'os onto peiros. So we actually learned the following, that since the rule, as we'll begin today in the second chapter, that ma'os, Meiser Sheni, has to be used for food, for drink, but for food, how can you buy something that you cannot eat? You can't. Since when there's no Beis HaMikdash / Mizbeach, you can't eat it. So your act of chilul was ineffective. On top of that, so then if you do an act of chilul and it's ineffective, so then what's pshat? The money will remain holy and the food is nothing. However, since you did something that you should not have done, which is you're attempting to be mechalalit on food that is not edible, halachically not edible, Beis Shammai holds that the Chachamim gave you a penalty. There is a knas, and that is not only must the money now be destroyed because you can't do anything with it, there's no Beis HaMikdash, the food that you attempted to use also cannot be consumed anymore. Beis Hillel disagrees. He holds there is no such knas, but the way we learned the Braisa. But Beis Hillel agrees with Beis Shammai that your act of chilul was completely ineffective. Now remember, I think someone mentioned it because we finished quickly there last year. All of this poses a big problem on our Mishnah. What is our Mishnah saying? That you bought an animal. So an animal. But the Chiddush was that you don't say havlah. That when you exchange it on an animal, the animal has to be buried. The animal has to be you can't do anything with the animal. Not only not with the meat, not with the hide. What are you talking about? According to Beis Hillel, if there's no Beis HaMikdash, your act of deconsecration was ineffective. Not only Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai yoichet. Beis Shammai there's a knas, so at least it's going to chap that the Mishnah comes like Beis Shammai. It's going to be we didn't bring it to the Mishnah yet. But before we bring it to the Mishnah, the Gemara today is going to begin by quoting this Rab Krispa, and he's going to have a whole new understanding of the Braisa, that the Braisa, Machlokes, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, is not step number 2. It's not about being machalal the ma'os Meiser Sheni on produce in Yerushalmi. No, it's about taking the original produce, Bisman she'ein Beis HaMikdash Kayam, and being paid it on money. We're going to speak it out when we learn it inside. That is where they argue. And we're going to have a little bit of a back and forth again to clarify exactly where is the machlokes of the Braisa that we just quoted between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. After the Gemara closes that sugya, we're going back to another sugya that we had in the last year, machlokes Rab Chagai and Rabbi Yirmiyah, and we already mentioned that the Gemara today is going to go back to it. Now, what Rab Chagai holds is actually the halacha, the way that Rambam paskins, which is that she'ein mechalalin ma'os Meiser Sheni lechatchila chutz liYerushalayim, even if you're buying food that will make it to Yerushalayim still edible, or buying an animal outside, you don't do that lechatchila. That's Rab Chagai. Rabbi Yirmiyah challenged him. Rabbi Yirmiyah holds that you could lechatchila buy. Who told you can't buy? And therefore he had a whole different pshat in the mekachtos of a halah, as we learned in the last year. From the Sugyan Daf Yud that came out, that Rab Chagai actually acquiesced to Rabbi Yirmiyah. What the Gemara is going to do here on Daf Yud Aleph is we're going to back up Rab Chagai. We're going to actually show that Rab Chagai's opinion is correct. And indeed, that lechatchila, if you have mois, ma'aser sheni, the right place to use it, meaning to buy food with it, is dafka when you are inside the walls of Yerushalmi. The final sugya before the new chapter is going to be a machlokes between Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina and Shmuel, which is a very important machlokes. These are details that we never thought through. And that is, when you are using the funds of Ma'aser Sheni to buy food in Yerushalayim, we're going to describe it as it being a 3-step process. I'm not going to give more than that, but it's very interesting. When you learn it, you say, it's going to make sense, but it's going to be a very thorough understanding of what needs to happen. Don't forget that if I'm using funds to buy food, there are 2 things that are happening, perhaps at the same time, perhaps dafka not at the same time. There is a kinyan, hilchos kinyanim. And by a kinyan, by metaltalin, which is food, the main kinyan is meshicha. And if you do meshicha, even before you give the money, you were koine it. Don't forget that. And we're going to see how we're going to apply that. So imagine I have money. I'm buying your food. My money is holy. Your food is not yet holy. Right? When I buy it, the kinyan does a chilul, or we learned a few days ago, or there's a way of verbalizing the chilul. But let's figure out exactly what happens when you buy, which is the buyer first does Mashiach. What happens afterwards? That will be the final topic of this Perek. And the next Perek, here there's such a beautiful Seder, Perek Sheni. Now that we said what you should not use Mo'ez Ma'aser Sheni from, which was Halacha Gimel, right? You can't use it to buy Mayim, you can't buy Melach, you can't buy Peiros that are Mechubarim Lekarka. The Mishnah is now going to tell you what you could use the money for in Yerushalayim. And the Mishnah will open up the following topic. There's so much throughout Shas of what happens when there's mixtures. And let me give you the context of the mixture that we will address at the end of today's daf. It's not uncommon for a person to have a food item that is both Ma'aser Sheni and Chulin. As a mashal, if you put spices into food, I have Ma'aser Sheni food, and I added spices to it. The spices were Chulin. And because of the fact that I'm the greatest chef over here, we're Zeran, now the food is more valuable. More valuable means that if let's say people spiced up wine, so the wine was worth three, or the spices are worth 2. Just gonna find the right numbers to be consistent. And I added spices in the value of 1. $2 for the wine, $1 for the spices. Just to know that if you know what you're doing, the value of what you will have won't be a $3 item. Because of you doing what you're doing, now there's a shvach. Now it's worth 4. If I want to be poide it, Vlad, question will be, what do we do over here? How much money must I give for the Ma'aser Sheni? How much money is the chulin? How do we evaluate it? And we're going to see that it's proportionate. I'm giving a simple mashal. In other words, in a case where the chulin was 1/3, whatever the shvach was, 2/3 Ma'aser Sheni, 1/3 chulin, the Mishnah, that will be a simple rule. That the shvach will be the same proportionate. 2/3 of the shvach will be Ma'aser Sheni. And if you're redeeming it, you have to give for that. And for the other, you don't have to give anything because that was chulin. That's going to be more or less the big rule of the Mishnah. But coming back over here quickly, so remember, you have this noch on top of the Amit. Lokula Alma. The way we learned so far, since you're using Ma'aser Sheni on food which legally cannot be eaten because there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no Mizbeach, so that act of chilul was ineffective. Says Beis Shammai, first of all, ineffective means the money remains holy and you're stuck with it. There's nothing you can do with it. Throw it into Yam HaMelech. On top of that, you attempted to do something that you're not allowed to do. I'll show you. The food is also now gechap with Kedushas Ma'aser Sheni. And Beis Hillel said, no. You're amoida to you, Beis Shammai, that the act of chilul was ineffective, but there's no rabbinic class. So everything stays the way it was. The money remains holy, and the food is not holy. Says the Gemara, Ovad Rab Crispa. Now, another interesting thing. This Braisa, the Gemara sometimes just quotes a Braisa. How did we learn the Braisa? Because Rab Zvida, we overheard Rab Zvida sitting and teaching his son. Don't forget, everything was Torah Shabbat Peh. So certain families, how do you know the Chassidish Shamaisa? Ich habe es gehört von that Mashpia. That's what happened. So they overheard Rab Zvida teaching the Braisa. So here now you have people that stuck their nose in. So Amar Lei, when Rab Crispa passed by and he it's eingehert on that Braisa, he told Rab Zvida, no, you're not doing a good job. This is only, guys, this is in Yerushalmis. The Israelis are that way. Imagine. Instead of seeing a father learning with the son and being filled with pride, look how beautiful a tata lent with the kind, you have to tell the father, you're not teaching your son correct. You misunderstood the Braisa. Okay. Nah, they were not debating on the step number 2, on the ma'ois back onto food. No, ela peris ala mois. That is where they're debating. And let me just speak out. You see, Rabbi Crispa didn't speak it out. That what? That according, again, what's the whole, why are you deconsecrating it? Think about it. Why are you being poided? The answer is because since you have to eat it in Yerushalayim and it's so far away and you don't want to schlep it, so Hashem says, I'll give you a way of facilitating your mitzvah. Since there's no Beis HaMikdash, there's no point taking it to Yerushalayim because you're not allowed to eat it. So since there's no point in making that first pidyon, so same thing. Everyone holds the pidyon is ineffective, which means the original peiros remain sanctified with Kedushas Ma'aser Sheni. On top of that, Beis Shammai says there is a knas. You attempted to put it on money. Gesund to hate, get your way. The food is holy and the money is holy. Both of them have to be destroyed. The same thing. In other words, that what you no. We don't accept that this is correct.
If it was, though,
then we were not. Well, you have to just bury the food. Correct. He's saying there's a big no. Danny's saying good because Vlad, when we go in step number 1, halachically, we are allowed not to have the same values aligned and to still be paid it. So if I have the worth of $1 million of Ma'aser Sheni, which I can't eat, if I can be paid it on a pruta, at least I saved myself $10 million. In other words, I lost a mitzvah. I can't eat it, but at least be paid it to save loss. If you can't even do that, then all of the food has to be buried. And has to be like yirkevu. Okay, 1 second.
Was he aware or unaware that he's not allowed not to eat it in Yerushalayim?
In other words, Kavan is making a good point that it could be that if we're speaking about such a knas, this is a real financial knas, to say that they gave a knas on someone who didn't know what they're doing is difficult. Maybe they only gave a knas when you knew that you shouldn't have done it. The big avera here. It's a very heavy-handed knas. In other words, Beis Shammai says that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel will hold that it's going to be ineffective. Nishnor them, Beis Shammai says the money is also, and Beis Hillel will say that Pedo is k'moy shehem, mo is k'moy shehem. That is where they argue. But here's the key. Okay, if they argue on step number 1, what will they hold by step number 2? That's what Rab Crispa is saying. Hamois ala Pedo. But now, how did you even get there, Danny? How did you even get there? The Gemara is going to ask. Because if you can't do step number 1, how would you have funds of Ma'aser Sheni? I'll tell you how. The Beis HaMikdash is standing. You were paid it on money. And then there's the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Okay. So now you have money and you want to do it under step number 2. Divrei Hako loy kachu. Everyone will agree. Loy kachu would mean that there is no kanas kavan. But the money retains its kedusha. The money retains its kedusha, and the peiros do not. Now let's bring it back to the Mishnah. Whichever way you're going to learn the Braisa, our Mishnah is problematic. Our Mishnah is speaking about the case of the Mishnah was you bought an animal outside Yerushalayim. Forget about that detail. Bottom line is you have, according to the first understanding before Rab Crispa, according to Rab Zvida's understanding of the Braisa, our Mishnah will be according to whom? Will be according to whom? How did you have a behema? How did you have that? You know how you had it? According to Rab Zevida? Only according to Beis Shammai, which is not so exciting. In other words, if the pidyon of the money on the case of the Mishnah was you bought an animal chutz Yerushalmi, if it's ineffective, so why did the Mishnah say you have to let not only the basar and the hide? So according to Beis Shammai, which means really the money is holy. The Chachamim gave a knas that the animal is also holy. Now, what do you do with the animal? You don't say havla, you bury the meat, you marry the hide. The whole thing gets ruined. So at least you can zetz ein the Mishnah leBeis Shammai, which is not ideal, but according to Rab Krispa's understanding of the Braisa, that lekula alma, when you have ma'os on peiros, the food that you bought, that you were machalol the ma'os for, lekula alma, there's no knas over there. So how will there ever be an animal that has to be destroyed? Why? Doesn't exist. That's a problem. We learned in the Mishnah that im ein migdash, then yirkevu. Again, lirab zvida, at least the Mishnah follows Beis Shammai. And you're right, yirkevu is not because it's consecrated biblically, but it's at least consecrated mit knas, mit rabbanan, zozayin. According to Rab Krispa, bein leBeis Shammai, bein leBeis Hillel, loy kachu. When yirkevu. So answers the Gemara, and like I spoke out by heart, how did you even get money? The answer it has to be, when the temple was still standing, when you did step number 1. So I can give the same answer for step number 2, that Rab Krispa could be right, that if a person, Bisman She'ein Migdash Kayim, took the money and he bought something with it, according to no one will that item remain holy. The Mishnah wouldn't say Yirkavu. But what were to happen if you did step number 1 when the temple was standing and you did step number 2 when the temple was standing? You had the mois, you bought the animal, Bisman Beis HaMikdash Kayim. Now there was a Churban Beis HaMikdash. Now you have the animal. In that case, the Mishnah says Yirkavu. So it's a more limited case, but the halacha has to be said. Tiftar, you have to answer the Gemara, Shekdishan B'Shas HaMikdash, and now B'Charav HaMikdash. In that limited circumstance, that's what the Mishnah is saying. The point of the Mishnah is that since you cannot eat it, all of it has to be destroyed. And again, the real chiddush of the Mishnah is that when you go from the original into money, we are allowed to deconsecrate it on money of only 1 pruta. But once you already took the money and you bought peiros, even when you may not eat the peiros, like there's no Beis HaMikdash, you don't have an option now to say, well, at least let me make another act of chilul. Many other things could work that way. You're mechalal here, you're mechalal again, like by Peiros Shvis. You can be mechalal. Here, you can't do that. You have to keep the peiros. None of it can be consumed. All of it will have to be destroyed. Okay. And now we're going back to Rab Chagai. Rab Chagai, Rab Yirmiyah. Rab Yirmiyah says, Lechatchila, you are allowed to buy peiros chutz Yerushalayim as long as they'll make it there. And Rab Chagai holds, which is taka da halacha, that Lechatchila, she'ein mechalal in mois, Lechatchila chutz Yerushalayim. Says the Gemara, Tani ben Bibi. Yabakuk, was tutzer da. Did we ever have a Bibi? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking.
Sometimes it's like beef, but
Tana ben Bibi. That what? Now, I want you to read, just to get it, guys. I like it. To read the psukim. So you look in the Torah Oira Shalom. And we're going to read the whole series because there's a couple of words that sound the same, but they are from different psukim, just to know the pshat and the Gemara. It says like this, this is all about Pashas Re'ei Meiser Sheni. V'chiyirba memcha haderech, ki lo yisuch al se'esoi, ki yirchak memcha hamokim, asher yivchar Hashem alikecha l'asam shemay sham. And if you have only an apple, who cares if you live far away? No, because God is blessing you. You have a field and you have tons of produce. So what should you do? Zakta Torah. V'nosato b'kosev. Now this v'nosato b'kosev is speaking about the first act of being poida your produce onto money. That's what I'm calling step number 1. That's v'nosato b'kosev. So first you redeem it on money. Now you have money, and it worked. So the food is free. You can leave the food in the fridge. You can eat it wherever you want to eat it. Oh, but the money is halik. So the Torah says v'tzarta hakesev v'yadcha, bind the money in your hand. And whenever, not whenever, during that year, ideal, and then go to Yerushalayim. And now the next pasuk is about step number 2. Now you enter Yerushalayim. Now you have in your hand money that has kedushas ma'aser sheni. Vos tustu midem v'nosato hakesev. You should spend that money. And now we have the klal u'pratu klal. Right? B'chol asher ta'ava nafshecha. The Torah gives now 4 pratim: b'bakar, b'tzoyim, b'yayin, b'shechar, etc. Okay, clear. So now you have in the first step produce onto money v'nosato ba'kesef. And then in the next pasuk, the money onto produce, step number 2 is v'nosato hakesef. That's what the Baraisa is saying. First pasuk, v'nosato bakosef, when you are redeeming the payrois onto money. So says the Baraisa, where is it that you do it? Only berichuk makoim atoy perdeyoi. Berichuk makoim means outside the walls of Yerushalayim. Not a kilometer out, not 10 kilometers out. Inside is Bekiruv Makim, outside is Berichuk Makim. Just that's the given. So only Berichuk Makim Ato Pideyoi. Bekiruv Makim, Ein Ato Pideyoi. Very good. I mean, it's clear. The pasuk is saying the only reason why you're allowed to do it is because you don't want to schlep it. If you are already where you can eat it, you don't have to schlep it. So there's no justification, and that's not. No, it's the moment I brought the payros inside Yerushalayim, a person can say to himself, I bought a whole sack of apples. I don't want to eat apples this time around. Let me redeem it onto money. I'll leave the money in my apartment in Yerushalayim, and next time I'll come, I'll buy whatever. You can't do that. It's once you entered Yerushalayim, you can't do it. That's clear. You have to, you can't take it out. You have to eat it. If you don't want to eat it, give it to people to eat it. Okay.
Or you sell it outside.
You cannot sell it. Once you brought...
Keep it. Stop.
No. Once the produce is in Yerushalayim, it may not be redeemed. You can't, that's right. Before you come in, that's right. But Bekirim Makam, that's clear. Now, the next pasuk, which is speaking about what you should do with the money that already has in it vested Kedusas Ma'aser Sheni when you enter the city. So when it says, V'nosato HaKesev, so teaches the Braisa that just like step number 1 is outside, so he understands the automatic flow of the psukim. So when is it that you're going to use the money to buy fruit? Think about it. If you're going to buy fruit outside Yerushalayim, so what did you accomplish? Like, what did you accomplish? The Torah allowed you to do it for you not to have to schlep it. If you're buying it outside Yerushalayim, produce, and you have to schlep it, so maha'ilu chachamim b'takantam. Maha'ilu do'evish b'takanosei. So that's the pshat, that no, v'nosata kesev means, at least lechatchila, that only bekiruv mokem ata mechalaloi. V'i ata mechalaloi b'richuk mokem. Mamish like Rab Chagai. Even though Rab Chagai retracted like Rabbi Yirmiyah, the Gemara is like the Gemara wants to make a closure to this. We have a brisa, and that's taka the way that Rambam paskas. Okay, now I'm just giving you an example of the case of the Mishnah that we are going. Yochel kenegdan. So let me go back. A person bought, let's say avodim. What was the cases? Avodim, karkois, and some other din. A behema tameya. Point is, if a person bought non-food items, so the halacha is. And this is, by the way, whether you bought it in Yerushalayim, whether you bought it out of Yerushalayim. So the Mishnah says, Yochal Kenegdan. And let's learn our Sugya Kishitas Rashi. Okay, guys, let's go through because it's easier. What is Shitas Rashi? Since I bought non-food items, the Chilul did not happen. How did it happen? Which means that the buyer, I had the money. The money is Ma'aser Sheni money. If the Chilul didn't happen, so now the seller has in his possession, whether he knows it or not, Ma'ois Ma'aser Sheni. What I bought, the Eved, is Taman Eved. I have no Ma'aser Sheni concerns. Yochal Kenegdan means, so what did the Chachamim say? It's wrong what I did to the Moicher. So what should I do? I should take money in the value of the money that the seller got. Say, I gave him $1,000. I take my own out-of-pocket $1,000, and I say, says Rashi in Kedusha Naf Nun Vav, may the Kedusha of my Sheni that's on the money in the hands of the Moicher, may that holiness go into this money. So at least I rectified the mess that I made. That's the Yerchel Kenegd. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi, B'Shem Shmuel, we're going to call the Shita Shmuel. I want you to know that Nikna Hamekach, In other words, even though the Ma'aser Sheni sanctity did not go into the Eved, even though the seller has now money that's vested with Kedusas Ma'aser Sheni, we don't say the Mekach Tos. We don't say, well, if the seller would have known, maybe the seller never would have agreed. We don't say that. That was the whole thing that we learned 2 days ago. Why don't we say that? Why don't we say that? Okay, but we don't say that. That's why Shitas Rashi is a good understanding. You know why we don't say it? Because since Yoichal Kenegdan will resolve the problem, so why should we undo the Mekach? We don't like undoing a Mekach. There's a solution. Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Chanino says that ki poideu really prior to the Yoichal Kenegdan, the Mekach is not finalized. He takes it more. According to Shmuel, Nikna HaMekach, independent if the seller, if the buyer does the right thing or not. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, no, I disagree with you. He says that since you gave the seller money that is imbued with Kedushas Ma'aser Sheni, that transaction is in limbo. Only when Yoichal Kenegdan, and not just Yoichal Kenegdan, we're going to go with Rashi, that when you get the money, when you separate the Kenegdan money, you declare that you're being poida it. Now that you resolve the mess that you made for the seller, now does the transaction go into effect? It doesn't go into effect right away even. Wow. Shmuel says the transaction goes into effect, and now you're chayiv to fix it. Very big difference. When I buy something that is defaulted, I would like just to get it back. And the seller would like to say, no, I'll fix it for you. This transaction is valid. I'll resolve the mess. That's a machlekas. Okay. Amar Apila, says Apila, that minman de taninan, from the words that we have in our Mishnah, that what? Yoichal kenegdon, I'm going to extrapolate, I'm going to learn hada amra, that kachu, what's pshat, the Mishnah should have said, that what? That the transaction, you have to go find a meicher. The Mishnah doesn't say you have to go find a meicher. So he disagrees with the second opinion, right? He disagrees with Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Chanina. It's not mashma from the Mishnah. Well, according to Shmuel, the words of the Mishnah work, right? The transaction is done, finished. The only thing that has to happen is Yoichal Kenegdan. You're chayv Yoichal Kenegdan. According to Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Chanina, it's not mashma that way. That until when you're Yoichal, and not only Yoichal Kenegdan, you have to make an act of pidyon. According to Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Chanina, you know what the Mishnah should have said? Go give it back. Go get your money back. Give him back his eved. You messed him up. If you didn't do it and you were Yoichal Kenegdan, you fixed it. It's taka not mashma like Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Chanina. Now we have to remember one thing. For Rabbi Hila to make such an extrapolation, if we want to go back a few daf ago, that's the second to last line in the Mara Fulda, there was one sheet in the Gemara that said that this whole statement of Yoichal Kenegdan is only when she'ein ha-moicher kayim. So his proof is not a proof. It was if you're going to learn pshat in the Mishnah, whenever the Mishnah said Yoichal Kenegdan, it's taka only when you don't have the moicher. Then Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Chanina fits perfectly with the Mishnah. Of course, the Mishnah says Yoichal Kenegdan because you don't find the moicher. And if you would have the moicher, if you know where the seller is, then the seller should get his eved back. But since not everyone learns the pshat in the Mishnah, that the Mishnah only said Yoichal Kenegdan when the moicher is ein kan, when she'ein halach ha-moicher, then you have a good raya. From the Mishnah, it's mashma that transaction is valid right away. Okay, good point. In other words, the Mishnah seems to lean like Shmuel. Transaction is valid. There's no retraction. Let's go even if the moicher is here, but you are chayiv to fix what you did. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yossi, let me tell you the following. that in any event, not when you bought something inedible. Let's say you bought something edible. Think about exactly what needs to happen for this whole thing to play itself out the way Hashem wants. So we're speaking about step number 2. I have Mo'is Ma'aser Sheni, and I'm buying your food. I'm buying a steak. All right, Basar Shchuta is no problem with Kula Alma. What affects the kinyan when it comes to metaltalin? Meshicha. Even if no money was given. So think about what exactly happens. Not in the case of the Mishnah where I bought non-food items. I bought a food item. When I do Meshicha, what happens? Don't think that the moment I did Meshicha, mitamol, my steak became holy. How did that happen? I have money in my pocket that I owe. So what? When I do Meshicha, all that Meshicha did was, it affected the kinyan. So now I have Mois Ma'aser Sheni, and now I have a steak. At this step, the kedusha of the money doesn't b'chlal go on the steak. It doesn't work that way. What must happen, according to Rabbi Yossi, I, who now have in my possession holy Ma'aser Sheni money and a chulin dika steak, a non-Ma'aser Sheni steak, I have to make a declaration. I make the declaration that the kedusha of the money should go on the steak. And then I give the money to the moicher. So the point of Rabbi Yossi is, of course Shmuel is right. What does Shmuel say? That even before I resolved my mess, the transaction takes effect. Because in all cases, the transaction takes effect before we even begin to deal with the Ma'aser Sheni Kedusha going back and forth from one thing to the other. Let's read it inside. Amar Rabbi Yossi, in any case, B'kivin shemashach, when you do the normal kinyan, the ideal kinyan on metaltalin is Mashiach. And when you do that, nikna hamekach, and says Rabbi Yossi as a given, don't think just because you bought a steak, somehow, since you are planning to pay him with Mois Ma'aser Sheni, before you paid him, there's no way that the Kedusha will go into the steak. Not only that, you don't get to give him just the money. You don't do that. You don't just give him the money. You think because you give him the money, somehow the money will, the Kedusha, why would the money leave? How will the Kedusha leave? Well, it's if I do a kinyan of Kesef, it's different. If I would do a kinyan of Kesef. There you can argue, since I'm giving him the money, so there's some sort of automatic, that's what we learned 2 daf ago. Mekach, chilul. The chilul happens automatically through the mekach. But in most kinyanim, you're not giving money. So anyways, there has to be, after the mekach, there has to be you meaning you, the buyer, you have to take care of the kedusha on the money. So why should our Mishnah be different? Here you bought an eved. I know that you should not have paid with Mois Ma'aser Sheni because an eved is a non-edible. I get that. So what? Nikna mekach. Can't say mekach tos. At that point, anyways, nikna mekach. Elama, you made a declaration, made the kedusha go into the eved. That declaration was ineffective. I got it. So you made a mistake there. So go fix it. So get new money out of your pocket and your chil kedegdan. That's gavaldik. Mikan ve'elach. What happens after the first step of the kinyan? It's like a new transaction, which is great. And therefore, Shmuel is right. We don't say that until when Yoichal Kenegdan, the transaction is on limbo. We don't say that. Because even when you buy a food item, the transaction is never on limbo. The transaction has nothing to do with the chilul. And indeed, Amar Rabbi Yudan, since Rabbi Yossi is right, so what happens is, it's not like first you do Mashiach, and then you just give the money. No, you do Mashiach. Tzarech lachzer ulahagdishoy, or lahagdishon, and then, shu savar loymar shem kichu, v'loy kichu. In other words, don't think, that's the way with the Marafol to learn, that if you don't make an explicit statement of Kedusha, which means the Kedusha of the money goes into the food, don't think that if you don't do that, it's going to happen automatically. It doesn't happen automatically. And all of that is to back up Shmuel, that if even when you use the money for a non-food item, you can't say that transaction is, you can't say that. Because the transaction always takes place before you deal with the chilul.
They say that that's always the case, or specifically in the case of
Mashiach. No, it's the only.
For Meiser Sheni.
That's right. Yeah.
In a regular purchase, I just give you money, you give me the item.
No. All purchases that we learned that in Kedushin, right? The Iker, Kinyan, even if Mois Koines Minatoira, for sure, the transaction is only finalized with Mashiach regardless. And if I did Mashiach without giving money, now I'm Koine. When I do Mashiach, I'm Koine. I owe you the money. The Kinyan is Mashiach. The ideal Kinyan of Entalton is Mashiach.
Are we saying that the order here is specifically, he gives him the fleish, and then he has to
make an explicit declaration,
then hand over
and then hand over the money.
He handed over the money first.
Then the money, according to Rabbi Yossi and according to Rabbi Yudan, the money that he gave him is not yet deconsecrated. And what does he have to do later?
Yeah.
So now that the money, let's go. That's why I want to learn with Rashi. So he'll make that declaration later. But no one is going to say that the sale was voided. It doesn't work that way. Because it didn't happen at the same time. You're mixing two different things. And on that we say, Hadran Allah Meiser Sheni. We're going to come back to you. Meiser Sheni, people are laughing. It's going to happen, Chevron. And now we are beginning with the next chapter that also is called Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni, Meiser Sheni. Two parakim that have the same name. And now we're going from the Shlila into the Chiyuv. Not what you may not use the money for. First part of the Mishnah is what you should use the money for. And let's go with Rab Chagai. That you, first of all, you are already in the holy city. V'nosato hakesef. So again, v'nosato, I'm reading inside the Torah Yerushalmi. V'nosato hakesef b'choil asher ta'ava nafshecha b'bakor b'tzoin b'yayin b'sheichon. Klal prat. Now klal b'choil asher teshocha nafshecha. And the Torah says one word, v'ochal tosham. By the way, the Torah doesn't speak about drinking. The Torah doesn't speak about using an item that's meant to be smeared on your body, that you are, which you are, because really you are allowed to do achila, shesiya, and sicha, not sicha with wine, which is unusual, but sicha with the olive oil. So let's read the Mishnah. Ma'aser sheni nitan. What should it be used for? La achila, for the purpose for buying items that are going to be consumed. And or ulashasiya, and to be drunk, ulasicha, and for anointing. But now another nuance. What? Only lechol davar shedarkoi loichal. So if there are certain food items, as we'll give examples, that most people don't eat them, I cannot say, well, since I am going to eat them, I can use the Meiser Sheni funds. There is an objective. This is a food item. This is not a food item. Same thing with the lasuch davar shedarkoi lasuch. Now, our Mishnah here doesn't give an example of davar shedarkoi loichal versus not. Our Mishnah here gives an example of items that most people do not use to anoint, which is lo yasuch, not yayin or chaimetz, because they are customarily not used for anointing. Wine is used for drinking, and as is vinegar. Abo, what is davar shedarkoi lasuch? Sachu es hashemen. Shemen is always olive oil. That is what it's made for. Next rule in the Mishnah. Ein mefatmin shemen meiser sheni. You may not perfume oil of meiser sheni. How do you perfume oil, chavra? You take certain spices and or certain herbs that have a potent fragrance, and you put it in the oil, and the oil absorbs the scent of those spices and or herbs. What's wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong. We learned this in the whole sugya of making the ketairas, because true, everything is a give and take. True that the oil will be absorbing, will be makabel, the fragrance, shkoyach, but those herbs, which will be thrown away, they also take in a little bit of oil. So even though you might have argued, well, the bigger picture, I'm giving value to the oil. Yes, but the oil is holy, and it has to be consumed or smeared, and some of it will go to loss. You can't do it. So, emefatmen shemen shel meiser sheni. Another din. Ve'ein loikchen bidmei meiser sheni. To have the ma'os, I cannot buy already shemen mefutam. Why? 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 Says the Marafulda is not so pashut. Says the Marafulda, guys, 2-3 lines under the Gemara. Ve'ein loichen v'chulei mishum. Why? What's wrong, Vlad? I'm not losing anything. By the time it's when I bought the oil, it's already Yeah, but it doesn't matter. But the oil, some of the oil got lost before it became holy. Now that it became holy, what do I care? And don't forget, you can use oil to smear. I would rather smear on me fragrant oil. Bishum dibeinan davar hashava l'chol adam v'zeh einay ela l'mifunakim. That's a new din that you can only use funds of Ma'aser Sheni l'davar hashava l'chol nefesh. I'm curious whether the filet mignon or all of these very expensive foods, whether you can buy it. Maybe you can argue that only maybe that's taka the din. You can only buy regular food. I don't know where you would draw the line, but when it comes to fragrance, the Mishnah is drawing the line. Regular oil, everyone smears with olive oil. Perfumed olive oil is very expensive. For people to use that for sicha is something that, oil is a fortune. The real oil, not the eau de parfum. The perfume, you pay a little nothing, you pay a fortune with geld.
Wait, isn't the purpose using it?
Yeah.
So who cares?
I don't know.
It's...
We're learning. Let's go back. I'm saying from my own. The fact that God gave 4 examples, all of them are bread and butter. Rice and beans, whatever the expression is. It's basic foods, not very fancy foods. Now let's go back. Contrasting, spicing, oil. That's already Ma'aser Sheni oil. If you have already Ma'aser Sheni wine and you want to put spices, and that's the way people did it, just to know how it worked, spices that were added in wine were not removed. The herbs that were added in the wine, I don't know nowadays. Maybe nowadays I believe it's removed. I don't remember drinking wine that has things in it. But spiced wine, you would leave the herbs in it. So who cares if some of the wine goes into those herbs? You're not removing it. So if you're not removing it, you're going to end up drinking it. There's no problem doing it. And now, because of these examples, let's go to this example. So you have a wine, and you're putting in it. He's giving an example. What was put in it? I take back what honey or spices. They would add it in it to give it a tam. The wine, let me go back to my numbers. The wine that I have is a $2 worth of wine. The honey that I'm adding is a $1 worth of honey. When you know what you're doing, you don't have a sum total of a $3 worth, 2 and 1. Since you made up Grace Chachma, now it's worth 4. Now let's speak about a person that for some reason doesn't want to schlep it to Yerushalmi. He wants to redeem it. No problem. So aside of the fact that if you are the owner of the Ma'aser Sheni, you have to add a 5th. We didn't even get there yet. Forget about that. How much money do you have to give to be paid the wine? We don't say, the wine is worth $4, give $4. Or if I'm the owner, you don't say that. Why not? Because it's not right. Some of the wine is honey. Some of the wine is spices, which is chulin. It doesn't become Ma'aser Sheni. On the other hand, you can't say there's only $2 worth of Ma'aser Sheni wine, give $2. You can't say that because there is an added value. Question is, how much of the added value is sanctified? How much it's not? Proportionate. That's the rule of the Mishnah. Now that we said you are allowed to do it, and you did it. You put into the Ma'aser Sheni wine, you put honey, or you put spices. They are chulin. And you did it properly. So now, v'ishbiach, and now you want to redeem it. So the Mishnah says, hashvach lefi cheshbon. The case that I gave was very simple because you have 2/3 Ma'aser Sheni, 1/3 chulin. Whatever the shvach was, it added $1 value, it added $1 million of value. 2/3 is Ma'aser Sheni, which needs to be redeemed. 1/3 remains chulin. The example the Mishnah gave was where the ikid was Ma'aser Sheni. The ikid is the wine, and the honey and the spices, which is secondary, it's there to be in service of the wine. Says the Mishnah, let me go in the opposite direction. It's a chiddush. You might have thought in the opposite direction we would not say. We do say the same thing. What's the opposite direction? That you had fish. Fish, we learned fish is never Ma'aser Sheni. So you have fish that's chulin, and you cooked it together with kaflutois, leeks, Ma'aser Sheni leeks. The leeks were there For the fish, we say the same thing. Even though it's the fish is worth $2, the kaflutas is worth $1. Even though the fish is the ikir, the kaflutas is a topel. Even though we had a tana that we learned this in Masechtas Maasros, that what you add in the fish is not even to add taste. It's only to remove bad taste. If we were to view it that way, then the din might have been different, because the Ma'aser Sheni, maybe you can't even use Ma'aser Sheni. We don't say that. You are adding, you add the lemon, the leeks, it's to be nice and tam, good tam. And now the same thing. Next case, the Mishnah now says where you don't say it. In the case of the wine and the honey is a tangible. The wine is a tangible. In the case of the fish and the leeks, in either direction, the chulin is the ikir. What you have now is be'en, chulin, the fish, and you have leeks. What happens, as an example, you have dough, Ma'aser Sheni flour. You fired the oven with firewood. Firewood is chulin. And bread is worth more than the dough. Can I get away by saying that some of the added value I don't have to redeem? $2 of dough, $1 of fuel. I know it doesn't work that way, just as a mashal. $3, but now the bread is worth $4. Here we don't say that. Because since the chulin is a non-tangible, it's not taken into the cheshbon. All of the bread is called Ma'aser Sheni. That's the Mishnah's, the final case. Isa shel Ma'aser Sheni. Sha'afoya, that it was baked in an oven that was fired, or fuel. Wood is a chulin. And now v'hishbicham, we don't get to say that some of the shvach is called chulin. We don't get to do that. Here, all of the shevach is called Ma'aser Sheni. And why? Zahaklal. The Mishnah gives a reason. Kol sheshivchai nikar, recognizable, just for the record, means it could be identified in the finished product. It's recognizable. It's be'en. Then, whatever that is, if it's Ma'aser Sheni or chulin, we take it into account. It is. It's calculated. Hashevach l'fi cheshbon. But which is the case of firewood, I know that you need firewood to fuel it. I know that. But once you bake the bread, the fuel is not there. It's not recognizable. It's not identifiable. So then, what do you have? If you have flour was Ma'aser Sheni, the entire shevach is lasheni, and all of it has to be redeemed. Beautiful. To be continued.
The flour.
Gosh.